Up here today, someone asked me actually, I was asked at the table, do you ever get nervous before you speak? And I said, every time. People said, how can that be? You do this all the time. It's because I have a very high bar. I have a high bar for myself, and I have a high bar for bringing a message that I believe someone needs to hear. And I don't know who it is. Now the nerves all go away as soon as I stand up, because what I've learned to do is when I speak, I just let it flow. So I plan and I practice and I think about the message, but when the time comes, I just speak from the heart. And one thing I learned about speaking is I used to be a person who was freaked out about the audience reaction. I always looked for the person who didn't get it, who didn't like me, and I freaked out about it. And now I've learned that when I speak, I'm only here to speak to one person. And I don't know who it is. I may speak to more, but there's one person here today who is meant to hear what I'm about to share. And sometimes I find out who that was, and usually I don't. But all I know is, if I share from the heart, that one person will get whatever the message is, and sometimes the cool part is, it's not even something I said. They just heard a message within what I said that they needed to hear. The other thing that made me a little nervous is when I agreed to do this, I said, well, I'm going to just do this program I did back in January for the Up Women Conference. I'll just redo it. I got that. Then I started putting it together, and it wasn't working for me. It was a great program, but it's not sitting with me. It's saying, there's a different message today. So I told Linda, who was there for Up Women, this is like 90% new. In fact, what I'm about to share today, I don't think I've ever said to a group this way. So I'm like really excited about it. So I'm hopeful that no one leaves in the middle, unless it's an emergency. The topic is relationships. And it's all things that I do. I always like to start with a story. And I want to take you back about 6 months ago. I was at the Cozy Small Business Conference. Who was there this past fall? Big event, right? Hundreds of people, all there to improve their business. It was a business event in a business setting at the IX Center. People are there to grow their business, to grow themselves professionally so they can be better in their business. Workshops, on, and keynote speakers. And yet, in the midst of this business arena, this business event, this business energy, I had an amazing experience that had nothing to do with business. And sadly, it's a unique experience. A friend of mine, I'd actually call him an acquaintance before this moment, named Jim, walked up to me rather sheepishly and said, Jeff, do you have a couple minutes? I said, of course, Jim. What's going on? He said, I'm not sure why I'm talking to you, but I feel like you're the one I'm supposed to talk to. He said, I'm about to speak in about an hour, and I'm struggling. I said, what's going on, Jim? He proceeded to tell me that he had just got back from California 3 days earlier. He was in California to see his brother, who was dying. His brother had been riddled with cancer for many months, and he was on his last days. He went to see his brother one last time. They had removed all of the life support systems. They were on the watch now. And he said, Jeff, I turned my phone off because I don't want to know, but I cheated and I looked at my phone. I have 4 voicemails. I'm convinced he's gone. And he proceeded to tell me about his brother. His brother was a rabbi. He told me his brother was his best friend, his spiritual advisor, his mentor. Said, I don't know what I'm going to do without him. And standing in the middle of this business event, I said, Jim, do you mind if I touch you? He said, it's okay. I put my hand on his heart, and I said, do you get that your brother is here right now with you? He said, yeah, I do. I said, yeah, I can tell too. And I said, here's the thing. That's never going to change. He's always going to be with you. Always, no matter what. And he started to cry. And he immediately chastised himself. He said, did the the male shake, the head shake. Oh, I can't cry. I said, why not? He said, this is a business event. And I said something out loud for the first time ever. I've repeated a lot since. I said, and tears are the truth, and they're always welcome. And we talked for a few more minutes. We shared a hug. He went on and did his speech. Turns out that's not what the message was. The message on his voicemail was his brother was still alive. His brother lasted 13 days. But we went from acquaintances to a relationship in that moment. And the sad part is, it was unique. Because how often does that dialogue happen at a business event? How often does that dialogue happen between two men in public anywhere? Anywhere. And sadly, how often does that really happen between any of us or enough of us? We all have a couple of our core best friends that we share that experience with. But how often do we share that experience with an acquaintance or even a stranger? Why can't we? Why don't we? Because we're afraid. We're afraid to be ourselves. We're afraid to be authentic. We're afraid to be vulnerable. And other people are afraid to be vulnerable too. What I think has happened for me is, because I work every day, it's work for me to live in an authentic place. And I think one of the gifts I've been given is the ability to be in a state of being that people find me to be safe. And it's okay to be vulnerable. I don't think I'm that special, though. I think we all have it in us. We're just afraid. And we're living our lives according to this fear. So what I want to share with you today are three sort of thoughts around some mini stories that I hope you can take from here and do something different the moment you walk out of here. Even if you are afraid. Even if you are afraid. The first story, how many of you grew up on television? Television was my life. And I'm largely disconnected from it, but it's still a big part of my life. And I also believe that almost every lesson we need or ever needed exists in television and the movies, and not in the obvious ways. So who remembers MASH? Oh yeah, great show. Great lessons throughout it that sometimes if you didn't pay attention, you missed it. You thought it was just a show. Well, I remember this episode. There was this pilot who had to bail out of his bomber and was slightly injured and ended up at the 407 7th match. And he sat down with Hawkeye and BJ, and he told them about his experience of the war, and it went like this. Every day I fly off that carrier, I sail through beautiful blue skies, over the countryside. I push a button, I drop my bombs, and I go home. And every weekend I have dinner in Tokyo with my wife. I have a great war going on. And they were troubled by that story, as you can imagine, because he wasn't getting what he was doing. And so the next day, Hawkeye brings him into the operating room, and he's operating on a little girl who's seriously injured. And the pilot walks up and he said, "What happened to her?" He said, "Her village got bombed." And the pilot said, "Well, who was it?" And Hawkeye said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Was it us or them?" And Hawkeye said, "Doesn't matter to her." And at that moment, that man woke up to his life. Later he said to Hawkeye, "Why did you do that to me?" He said, "Because you're too good of a guy to go through this believing that it's that easy." Now the truth is, was he going to quit the next day? No. He still had a job to do. He was going to do his job, but he was going to do it awake, knowing what was going on in life. No more blinders anymore. He had to deal with the hard stuff. And my invitation to you from that story is most of us need to wake up. Most of us are going through life asleep, and some people are in a coma. In a coma, you have no idea what's going on. You're just autopilot. Asleep is you have a little bit of an idea, but you don't want to go where you don't want to go. All the scary stuff you bury. All the stuff that makes you fearful, you bury. All the sadness you bury. You spend your whole life doing this. Nope, not going there. Not going to face that one. Not going to face this reality in my relationships. Not going to face this part of my life that I'm not happy in. I'm going to just keep telling everyone, it's okay. And here's what we don't realize, but it's true. If you bury the bad stuff, you bury the good stuff with it too. Because if you're burying the sadness and the fear, you're not experiencing joy. You don't get to pick and choose. You don't experience joy, you get to experience okayness. And how many people do you know that are pretty much okay? Some of you, even being here, there are parts of your days and your weeks and your months, you're just okay. And part of it is we're burying this. And it's tiring. You're spending all your energy doing this. And you wonder why you don't have great relationships. Because all your energy is on burying this. Being afraid or avoiding the fear. So my first invitation is wake up. And you know what? It might be hard. But you know what? It might not be. Maybe that's just a story. And maybe it's going to be scary. It probably will. But it's worth it. And it's worth it to be sad so you can experience great joy. It's worth it to wake up. Now, my second story comes actually from a speaking experience. Back in December, I was in Houston, Texas. I was working on the speech for the Up Women Conference. I was trying to come up with a title that was catchy. I was supposed to talk about the male perspective on relationships. It was frightening. I had some titles I liked, but I wanted to try them out, so I decided to do some market research. And there was a table of 5 women in a bar, all different ages. And I said, well, that's the audience. I should go ask what they think. But I'm not stupid. I knew I needed to be cautious in how I approached this table. And you all knew it before I even got to the line. So I walked over to their table, trying to be as quiet as this big, giant person can be in terms of not racing into their environment. And I walked up and I very quickly told them what I was about, and I knelt at the table. That was purposeful. I purposely knelt on the ground to talk to them. And they were willing to talk to me, and they finally said, so what are you doing? I told them, and I said, I'm supposed to talk about the male perspective on relationships. And as soon as I got that phrase out of my mouth, the woman at the table, who was probably a couple years older than me, jumped right in with this statement. Well, I can tell you what that problem is. Now, whenever I hear a statement that confident, especially around a complex area, my ears perk up, because I know one of two things are going to happen. It's either going to be so profound, wisdom from the mountaintops, or it might be jaded. I judge it to be the latter. Because here's what she said. The problem with men is that they don't know how to experience their emotions, and they don't know how to be emotional, and therefore they can't be in healthy emotional relationships. I heard her. I said, I've heard that before, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. Now, I'm not going to finish the story yet. I'll come back to that in a moment, what we talked about next. But in that statement is the next piece we need to be aware of. We spend way too much of our time, especially around relationships, living in the they world. And we need to put they aside and pick up the I. Because it's not about they, it's about me. If your relationships aren't working, all you need is a mirror. That may not be what you came to hear. But I spend my days talking to people about relationships, and almost everyone talks about relationship failures and setbacks and inconsistencies and shortcomings with their finger pointing. Or someone says to me, I've been in 4 or 5 relationships over the last 10 years, none of them worked, I don't understand. And I usually ask the grenade question, which is, what do all of these have in common?